So, welcome to the Enlightened Leader, the place where we talk about the future of leadership today. I'm certain that today's guest will be sharing some insights that will really be definitely getting your brain into gear. Dr. Sarah McKay is an Oxford-educated neuroscientist and the founder of the Neuroscience Academy. She really specialises in translating brain science research into simple, actionable strategies for peak performance, creativity, health and well-being. So today I've asked Dr. McKay to come on the podcast to see what she has to say about the role of neuroscience in the workplace and how leaders and teams can really benefit from understanding a little bit more about how the brain works. So, Sarah, good morning. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's an honour to be invited to chat.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you on. Just to let the listeners get to know a little bit more about you, could you tell us a little bit about your background, Sarah, and what you're currently doing today?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm currently sitting in Sydney, Australia, on the northern beaches in lockdown, looking out on a very cloudy day, which is the first day we haven't had a beautiful sun in the month of August. I run a online, I suppose, neuroscience explaining machine is perhaps the best way to describe it. My background is in neuroscience. People may or may not be able to tell by my accent that I grew up in New Zealand, and I was a kid that I loved books, loved learning, was very, very curious about humans and how we think and feel and behave. I still am. I met and fell in love with neuroscience in my first year of university back in the early 90s in a psychology lecture, and was learning about synapses. That's how two neurons or brain cells talk to each other in the brain. And I was utterly transfixed. Then read a book with an unusual title called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by neurologist Oliver Sacks. And if anyone's read the book, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If they haven't, Oliver Sacks was an amazing storyteller and neurologist who explained and these kind of case studies of his patients, what kind of goes wrong with humans when things go wrong with our brains, and what goes right with humans when things go right with our brains.
What was the book called again, Sarah? Sorry, I'm going to get a copy of that.
It's called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And that title comes from, it was one of the case studies that Sacks describes in his book. And this particular poor chap had a very unusual sort of visual disorder whereby he mistook sort of everyday object. He would think a lamppost was a person. And in this instance, he thought his wife was his hat and went to kind of put his coat on to leave the office and went to get his wife as if he was going to put her on his head because he thought she was a hat. That's where the title comes from. And I, learning about synapses, reading that book, this is the early 90s, I then switched universities, moved to another town to learn this brand new degree discipline, which had just emerged out of this university, Otago University in New Zealand, in Dunedin, New Zealand. And, I was 18. However many years, what are we at, like 30 years later or something, I'm still utterly captivated by neuroscience and the brain and by synapses and by how we think and feel and behave. And I've really been on this journey ever since, whether it be in the research lab, whether it be teaching, whether it be running a business, really about educating other people about neuroscience and how we can apply that in our, move it from the lab and apply it to our everyday lives.
Well, Sarah, I think, and like you, and I'm very much into neuroscience myself, and I'm a student, as we discussed before. But I think the thing that's really been exciting, certainly over the last, say, 10 to 15 years, is sort of that explosion of, research and insights that are coming. And a lot of it obviously is due to, advancements in technology and medicine and so forth. But it's really exciting to, like you, I think, to really delve deep into what makes us tick. And I think that, when it comes to the workplace, when it comes to people, leaders, I think that there's a real gap there. And I think that leaders, organizations, teams can all benefit from getting just a little bit more knowledge. But we talked about this as well. It's a real tough one because there's this, like, if you go into neuroscience, you've got all these terms and, things that just confuse the hell out of people. But at the same time, there's also a great deal of information or insights that we can take away, and it's sort of kind of cherry picking, I think, what we need to share with people.
Yeah.
But that's what you do, right? I mean, that's really what you're into, is sort of taking that.
I wouldn't say I'm cherry picking. I hope I'm doing the exact opposite of cherry picking.
Okay.
Which, when you look at it as a scientist, that's really about just picking the pieces of science which agree with your particular idea and ignoring the rest. So I'm trying very hard not to do that. In fact, quite the opposite as a scientist and science communicator. But I suppose neuroscience is this incredibly broad umbrella which encompasses an enormous kind of array of subdisciplines devoted to understanding the brain, nervous system, whether that be looking at like really intricate molecular pathways, their interactions, how perhaps genes may change to change the expression of certain receptors in neurons in response to patterns of electrical activity in the brain. We can get down into the real nitty-gritty, and that's an enormous field within the neurosciences. We could perhaps look at how different drugs interact with the brain. We could perhaps look at how the brain develops during childhood and how that is reflected in the emergence of particular behaviours or skills in children. Perhaps we can take a look at the neuroscience of learning and memory. We could then take a leap forward to what happens in terms of how we start to lose memory and the ability to think about the future and old age. We can start looking at diseases of aging. We can look at how hormones interact with the brain, what happens to the brain during pregnancy and menopause in women. There's just so many windows in to different aspects of humans and who we are and why we do what we do, that I suppose trying to package all of that up and give it to someone in the workplace and say, here, this will make you a better leader, isn't ever going to work. I don't think that neuroscience can necessarily make a leader a better leader. A leader knows, a good leader should kind of know what works in the workplace and how to understand the people they work with. In the same way a teacher understands how to teach children, in the same way that a therapist understands how to treat a patient perhaps suffering from depression. What I think neuroscience does is it kind of sharpens those tools we may already use, or perhaps sometimes just gives us a bit of kind of bolsters up and reminds us that what we're doing already works, because sometimes it tells us the reasons why it works. It doesn't always necessarily. Understanding how two synapses, a synapse in the brain, two neurons talk to each other, isn't going to make you a better leader.
Right.
But some aspects of neuroscience might perhaps teach you about emotional regulation or attention or empathy, for example.
And I think that's the real point here as well, I think, for me, because I think, like you said, very often good leaders or leaders that have already, got to a certain level in their career obviously have, I guess, the skills and the traits to some level to be able to lead people successfully. But there are sometimes, things that we do that we've been brought up with, especially, I'm in my mid-40s, and some of the concepts and ideas about things like learning, about, getting people to do things are quite old school, and they don't actually work. I mean, there are people. Let me take like Elon Musk, for example, goes out and talks about getting 3 hours sleep a night. And, that obviously there are people out there like him that can do that. But for the majority of us, in my understanding, we do need 7 or 8 good hours of quality sleep a night to get the best out of, our day and to be productive.
I suppose there's different definitions of a successful leader, right?
True. Yes. There's another topic.
Elon Musk may think Elon Musk is a magnificent leader. Whether all of Elon Musk's followers believe that is the case, it could be debated, and whether we should all model our lives on Elon Musk. I'm not entirely sure whether I would want to be one of Elon Musk's ex-wives, for example.
Absolutely.
And we can, you can debate about what makes a good leader or a bad leader. But I think from the perspective of neuroscience, we do have to be careful, because neuroscientists, as I say, we know a lot about how brains work. That doesn't necessarily mean we know how to make the workplace, more efficient or happier or more accepting. In the same way, the example I often give is, a quantum physicist understands how particles interact and an aeronautical engineer may understand the physics of how planes fly, but that doesn't mean you're going to get a physicist to run, Qantas.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the skills necessarily apply, but what we can do is I kind of look at it the other way. I think, what are some of the skills that we understand are really useful for leadership? And let's take one of them might be emotional regulation, because really, or some people might use the word emotional intelligence, the ability to understand how you react emotionally and to be able to express those emotions appropriately at the right time in a way that is going to influence others in a positive way is pretty useful and important. So what do we understand about emotional regulation from a neuroscience perspective and a psychology perspective is then the way I would approach that, rather than kind of coming from a bottom-up way of how can neuroscience make us better leaders. I like to look at what do leaders already do well, and is there neuroscience that we can explore that may enhance that particular skill?
So it's really, looking at, like you said, identifying what leaders are doing well, and then trying to bring in the pieces of neuroscience that can, help that.
And I would never be so arrogant, some scientists may be, to believe that as a neuroscientist I can go in and, tell someone how to, tell a head of, I'll just use this example because this is my husband, someone who's got a leadership role in Deloitte and financial services, how to run, Zoom meetings during a lockdown. I mean, I'm not going to be able to tell my husband how to do that simply because I understand neuroscience, but perhaps we could have a conversation together. And that's what I really think needs to be done when we talk about different disciplines that seem quite far apart. Having conversations is, what do you think works when you run a Zoom meeting during lockdown? What kind of insights have you picked up through your work that works well, what doesn't? And he may say, hey, well, I've kind of noticed that people aren't putting their hands up as much anymore to take on roles that they may otherwise have, which is what I would have seen if everyone was meeting face to face. I wonder why that is. And I said, well, that's really interesting. I wonder if that competitive edge has been lost because people aren't able to gauge each other's body language as much, because we're only looking at someone's face. We're not looking at the full interactions of a room of people. And what I think that neuroscience can offer is the ability to go in and have conversations with different disciplines, with different people, versus kind of going in and presenting, like throwing some neuroscience or neurosplaining, as I call it, just throwing some neuroscience knowledge at someone and go, here, this will make you a better leader. What I think different disciplines need to do, and neuroscientists as sought after as these sort of fonts of wisdom, I don't think we are, is the ability to have conversations about what's working, what doesn't. Hey, could we kind of approach this with a neuroscience lens and perhaps break this down and think about it in terms of predictable human behaviours?
I like that you sort of got a coaching approach there, Sarah, to that, where, like you said, you're sort of asking the right questions to dig down, to sort of connect and let the person think it through. And like you said, just where possible, adding in a bit of a sprinkle of knowledge or insights that you have about how the brain works. Can very often spark maybe, different thoughts and ideas about, like you said, how you could manage people in a Zoom meeting, or how you could get the best out of people in a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, and I have to say that coaching approach, which I now take, has been hard learned, and has really come about because I have worked over the years teaching a lot of coaches, and I have, sort of learned so much. I've probably learned more about human behaviour from them than they've learned from me, honestly. I don't think enough conversations take place, and enough, as you say, questions that are thoughtfully considered. I don't think that the role of neuroscience is to go and, sort of present knowledge to groups of people and say, here is what the brain does, go away and use it. It's to really take time to sort of think about what the other one needs and work together. Or else these disciplines just all stay very siloed and are kind of meaningless and pointless. I would never dream of, I've kind of used to volunteer back in the pre-lockdown days with my son's year 6 here in Australia, class of kids, and I know a little bit about brain development, a little bit about childhood learning and behaviour, a little bit about what happens in the brains of 11 and 12-year-olds as they're sort of starting to hit puberty. Does that in any way help me going in and teaching philosophy and ethics to a class of 12-year-olds? No, I'm like there, like wanting to hold on to the hand of the teacher saying, don't leave me alone with them. I need your help. So it's really, I so strongly believe, and I keep saying this, it's about asking questions and listening and having conversations and sharing knowledge from different disciplines together.
And you're right, I mean, there's some real basic principles I think you could learn from neuroscience that are very applicable to our lives that could make us happier and healthier. But sometimes they're just not, like, for example, having a good night's sleep, right? I mean, you don't have to be a neuroscientist to know that.
Your mum probably told you that when you were 10 years old.
Right.
But what we understand, and so essentially we know having a good night's sleep is important, because if you don't have a good night's sleep, you know how you feel the next day. I am an enormous fan of sleep. It's like my kind of superpower. I nap a lot in the afternoons, not for a long time in the afternoons, but a lot of afternoons. I will strategically nap for, say, 20 minutes if I kind of get that urge to sleep. I've kind of refined that down. I have a very positive association with sleep. I understand a lot of the things that you've got to do to promote sleep, and I understand the neuroscience underlying them. However, many of the kind of insights that we've gained from neuroscience almost kind of simply provide the biological mechanisms underlying a lot of the things that mum might have said, which might be, why would you have a nice warm shower or a hot drink before you go to bed? Well, we understand now when the sun goes down and it gets dark and our brains release melatonin, one of the mechanisms underlying that is that we start to release heat through our hands and our feet. And as we go from warm to cooler, that's one of the signals for our body to go to sleep. So that's why when you have a hot shower before you go to bed and your body cools down, you start the hot to cold transition, which is why if it's really, really hot, like it would be in Bangkok or Sydney in the summer, unless you've got the aircon on, it's harder to get to sleep because you can't throw the heat off your body.
Yeah.
Because it's got nowhere to go. You need the drop in temperature. So in Bangkok, you would probably have a warm shower and then turn the air conditioning on till it was really, really cool in your room, and that's how you would fall asleep.
That's exactly what I do.
So you've figured that out without having to understand the neurobiology of the dark signaling to your brain to release melatonin, which causes blood vessels in your hands and feet to dilate. However, when you understand the neuroscience behind why you've figured out what works for you, then you can kind of almost double down on that. What's also really interesting is to understand then that, when the sun goes down or when the lights go out, that dark signals melatonin. Melatonin doesn't make us fall asleep. It simply signals to the brain it's time to start doing all of the things that will make you fall asleep. So then you kind of understand, so that's why people are always going on about not looking at iPhones in the middle of the night because of the light. So again, you can kind of start to double down on the activities that perhaps you had figured out were important or had heard, perhaps the old wives' tales, you might call them. You've kind of got the proof, the kind of the evidence as to why they work, which may then make you more likely to do them again in the future.
You're sort of connecting the dots, really, aren't you, Sarah? You're sort of, and it gives you that that's why it works.
That's why it works. Yeah. And then occasionally you'll get some new information. So we just sort of stick with sleep. There's some really cool new science which has come out, neuroscience in the last couple of years around neurons in our retina and our eye, which is specifically tuned into the colour shifts that you see at sunrise and sunset, the shifts from blues through to oranges and pinks at sunset. The other way, it's, at sunrise, it kind of starts off dark and then it goes to pinks and blues and oranges and then to blue. Back in the olden days, when I used to do international flights and I'd fly on Emirates, they actually had to put the chromatic shift in before they turn the lights on the plane. It would be all dark and then they make the lights go kind of oranges and reds before they turn the light on, because that chromatic shift is almost as an additional signal. It's not just about light and dark. the pinky colours,
Mm.
that signal, the specific neurons in your retina pick up that go directly not to the visual part of your brain, but to the part of the brain which is involved with circadian rhythms. And that's why Emirates does that on their flights, and why looking at sunrises and sunsets, we're almost kind of biologically drawn to enjoy watching them.
Mm.
So if you can then that's kind of some new neuroscience that then might kind of go, oh, that's why I should perhaps engage in a little bit more sunrise or sunset viewing in my day, because that will also help me, set up my day-night circadian rhythms.
That's really interesting. I mean, I actually love to do that in the morning, and I'm lucky, obviously, living in a country like Thailand where, the sun is out more often than not. And I can get up, and I do like to get out in the early morning sunlight, and I love that feeling of the day, actually.
Yeah, the day emerges. It's a pretty special time of the day, and I think for those of us who are sunrise viewers or sunset viewers, there's a reason why we it is a bit of a special time of the day.
Yeah.
It's quite reflective and it's quite still. And often we're kind of gazing out at the sky. It's kind of a panoramic vision. And we understand also the neuroscience behind that is when you're looking at a panoramic vision, your eyes dilate, and it kind of activates your parasympathetic nervous system, because it's almost like the opposite of something being up close in front of your face and kind of threatening, which would hype up your sympathetic nervous system because it might feel threatening or challenging. When you're looking at panoramic visions far away, you're almost giving the signal to your brain, hey, it's time to kind of be calm and relaxed. And embedded in that is the viewing of the sunset, which is helping set your diurnal rhythms. So, you might be kind of naturally engaging in those practices anyway, right?
Yeah.
But, I've just given you some neuroscience to explain why it might be useful to carry on with them, not just think that there's some kind of silly little thing that you do.
Well, you've just given me one of those insight moments, because I'm a big fan of sailing, right? And I love
sailor as well.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm a cat sailor. I got a dart, and I love to go out around about 4 o'clock in the evening, 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I'm tranced out. I have to admit, I literally go out and I don't think about work. I don't look at my phone, and I lose complete track of time. And I always thought it was the closest thing I could get to like a flow state for me. But it sounds like it's a combination of the space and also the time of day, the light.
Yeah,
that's sort of it's creating that perfect ingredients, if you like, for a calm and relaxed mind.
And I'm a sailor, and I know exactly what you mean about being on the water at that time of the day. Me and my husband race dinghies. One of my kids has got a 29er, and we've got a yacht. We've got kind of a flotilla of boats. Wow. We spend a lot of time on the water, and I always used to have that sense, because when we used to race dinghies, kind of 1:30 start, and you'd kind of be coming back into the club at about 4, and we would have had an exciting race, and just that feeling that you get. And I think that there's a lot of panoramic vision involved, because you're constantly scanning out in front of you and around you when you're sailing, and it does there may be something in there. I've never really neuroscienced sailing before, but certainly being out in the natural world like that. And I think when you sail, you have to be very in tune with the weather and the water. There's not a lot of time for navel gazing when you're
absolutely.
You're kind of quite engaged with nature, and I do think it's, I suppose one might call it a mindful practice, but you do have to be out of your body and engaged with navigating your boat and yourself through the natural world, and that's a pretty special place to be, I believe.
It definitely is. I like the word mindful. That's exactly how I feel. I'm totally present and in the moment with it. Yeah. Now, Sarah, we're talking about you've got the Neuroscience Academy.
Yeah.
And I think it would be really good. I mean, if any of the people that managers or leaders or people listening into the podcast would like to know a bit more about what you do with the Academy, how it works. And of course, after having our conversation, I think that, if anybody is interested in learning a bit more or going sort of a bit deeper into neuroscience and maybe how it can help themselves or the people that they lead or the people that are around them.
Yeah, for sure.
How can you help, basically?
Yeah, for
That's the
sure.
question.
So I've been running versions of the Neuroscience Academy for about 5 or 6 years now. So essentially it's an online training program, but you can do it in a number of different versions. You can do it's sort of there's sort of a nice leisurely paced 12-week version whereby we have a couple of online video lessons a week, and we have weekly group Zoom coaching conversations, and that sort of it's quite a leisurely pace over 12 weeks. There's a Brain Coach Bootcamp version, which is kind of an intensive 2-week sprint, which is the identical content, but we have sort of daily video lessons and Zoom calls, or there's a self-study version which you can kind of pick up and go through at any particular point in time. Essentially, I wanted to create a program on applied neuroscience and brain health and offer that to professionals. The umbrella term I use is the helping professions, coaches, therapists, people working in mental health, leadership, social work, teaching, etc. We're really interested in how they can take learnings from neuroscience and apply them with wisdom in the work that they do. And so I've created and iterated and refined over a number of years this course, and it's really designed firstly to improve neuroscience literacy so people can understand some of the really basic scientific concepts within neuroscience and then use that to apply that with the work that they do. And as I was sort of saying at the beginning of this, it's not so much about me giving a whole lot of knowledge about synapses and action potentials and brain networks to people. There's a little bit of that in there, but it's really about having conversations about what do you already do, what works, how can we start looking at some of these neuroscience concepts and working with them with what you do. So there's a curriculum. It doesn't matter whether you do the 12-week version or the 2-week version. It kind of follows along the same path, whereby we look at some basic models of neuroscience, brain health, nervous system, anatomy, and physiology. We then take quite a deep dive into neuroplasticity, which was really my, I suppose, specialty within in neuroscience. My PhD work was really plasticity of the developing brain. We take a look at, kind of we have to kind of do not a deep dive, but more of a shallow dive into some really big chunky areas like cognitive neuroscience. How does the brain think and pay attention and multitask or not and make decisions? We take a look at those types of ideas. But instead of delving into absolutely everything that there is to know about cognition, we really focus on a few specific concepts, which over time I've figured out are really useful for the people who come to do these courses. We then take a look at things like emotion, motivation, behavior change, habits, understand all of these ideas that are relevant for whether you're a therapist or a teacher or a leader, but taking a look at the neuroscience of that. We take a look at brain aging, and then the final kind of, whether it be 3 days or 3 weeks of the program, depending on how you do it, we look really at brain health. So we start asking questions about exercise, sleep, diet and nutrition, concepts around social connection, and the social connection concept does run as a thread through the whole program, because it's perhaps an under-recognised but almost most important reason our brains evolved to do what they do is to kind of connect and understand other people. Stress, huge topic there. And I try and not, and I'm, without delving too far into the curriculum, try really hard not to just teach the same old stuff that you've heard before about there's a fight or flight response because you were once chased by a saber-toothed tiger into a cave. Don't take a look at that. The neurobiology of how our bodies respond to threats, challenges, and opportunities is really quite nuanced. We take quite a refined and careful look at the current understanding of the neurobiology of those types of concepts as well. So I just love teaching it, and the main reason I love teaching all of this is because I get to have these fantastic conversations with people who are doing such great work, And as I say, it's about the conversations that we all have together as a group, as a community, that I get to have with individuals, and then just kind of share this passion I have for this subject, and give people what they want and need, versus sort of just spraying neuroscience words, working with them to help them integrate that into the work they do.
You know, all the topics that you shared that you put into your courses and programs. I mean, for me, maybe it's just because I've had a bit more time on my hands over the last year, or maybe, let's say, more time on my own, I guess, to reflect on some of those things. And they're all, I mean, they're relevant at any time in our lives, but so much so now, probably more than ever. You know, we talk about emotions and stress and, like you said, social connections. I think people are crying out. I mean, I am. I can't wait to walk into a room full of, with people and have a good chat and sit down, and you just can't get that, I don't think, through things like Zoom and MS Teams. And
it's hard. I think I no longer have to introduce the idea of how important other humans are to brain health, as I would have perhaps in 2018 and 2019. I used to introduce the topic of social cognition and the importance of social connection to brain health by sort of showing this. There's this really interesting study that's been done showing where people rank determinants of health. And they'd always put social connection at the bottom, and they'd put other things like smoking or diet or exercise or vaccinations as higher determinants of health, and social connection would be down the bottom. But time and time again, the data shows it's actually most important. I bet if we did that now at this point in 2021, social connection would be perceived as so much more important than it used to be. I mean, loneliness is, we all know what that feels like now. It's taken this real new meaning, and to explore that from a brain science perspective is really useful, and I think is really fulfilling. And again, it kind of just makes you double down on what matters. That other people are the most important thing when it comes to our brain. They can be the worst thing for a brain or the most important thing for the brain. I should add, and this sounds a bit self-promotional, but I don't mean it to be, but I've written a book about women's brain health, taking a look at the kind of the female lifespan, sort of, I say, taking a look at puberty and periods and pregnancy and the pill and menopause and aging. And I thought that I was going to be going into writing a book about sort of biology and hormones and how they shape and sculpt the brain at different points in the lifespan. But the message that came through from the research for me was that at every point in the lifespan I considered in writing the book, and which I also now teach in the courses, is that what does an infant need? Well, I mean, you can feed and sleep and keep a baby dry, but it needs intimacy, it needs connection, it needs love, it needs attachments to be formed. What do children need when they go to school? They can't learn to read in isolation at home. They need that love and care and attention from a teacher. What do teenagers need more than anything? They just have this fundamental need to belong to a tribe. They're moving away from parents, and the friends become the most important thing. What do newborn, mums who've just had a baby need? They need that social support. What do, people in aged care need? They are so lonely, and what they need more than anything is that kind of the social connection and support of other people. So at every point in the lifespan, from the perspective of the brain, what the brain needs is other people. Now, I'm now telling people this, and they're going, yeah, we get it. A few years ago, I don't think anyone had that same personal connection to that idea. So there's lots of things that we cover off in the course. So we're carried away here now. But I hope my passion it comes through. But just to sort of put the passion aside, the course also gives you professional development hours, and you can get a beautiful certificate to frame and put on your wall. And there's coaching opportunities to take forward with me, etc. So
that's fantastic.
Come and check it out. Jump on board.
And as I said at the beginning, well, before we start the podcast, I'm definitely going to sign up, Sarah, and see what you've got to offer there. And I think a lot of, as I said, the topics that you've talked about, are so relevant in the workplace and in our personal lives. And I think the key message or takeaway that I've got from our conversation today is look, neuroscience has a lot to offer to teams and to leaders. And really what we need to do is take some time to reflect on the things that we're doing, to figure out what's working, to look at maybe where we could make developments, and then start to make those connections. And like you said, it's a lot of the stuff that we're doing, we already know, but having a little bit of knowledge about the brain really helps to reinforce or helps to resonate some of those points.
It can just give people, some confidence and some clarity around why they're doing and why it works. And I think, if we can, and I don't like to use the word empower people, but if we can give anyone, whether they be a leader or not, that a real sense of what they're doing is the right thing, it matters for them and it matters for other people. I think, that's the kind of the very least little gift neuroscience can give to somebody else.
Well, Sarah, your passion has definitely shone through today. I can hear it in your voice, and it's great. As I said, I'm a bit biased at this because neuroscience is something that I also am very much interested in, and very much I consider a student at the very beginning. But it's been fantastic to have the opportunity to talk to you and to learn about what you do, and of course, a little bit about how neuroscience connects with leadership. It's great.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.